The Netflix series Trust Me, The False Prophet continues to be among the most popular documentaries on any streaming platform in the last month. Last week, I did a deep dive video on it, talking about the broader context, the ethics, the approach, including an interview with the scholar Dr. Christina Galliano, who is an expert on the field. But when we're looking at the Short Creek story and the people who inhabit that community, these types of depictions and the frameworks they use can look a lot different from within that community. And I know we touched on some of those ethical questions last week, but there's still a bit more meat on the bone, so to say. So this week I wanted to continue that discussion with an interview with Shirley Draper, someone who was born and raised within the FLDS church, left, and then returned and is doing really important work helping others to make that same transition. She has been performing this long, hard, quiet work for quite a while that brings generational and substantial change. And sadly, it's rarely the type of work, insight, and perspective that gets highlighted. It's not as flashy as the type of efforts that get emphasized in documentary series. Now, she has a lot of strong opinions on this series, so be prepared for that. But I think it's a perspective that needs to be heard because it's a voice that's often lacking in not just this particular series, Trust Me, but the broader genre of American fascination with fundamentalism from which this series is drawn. Before I go much further, just a reminder that if you enjoy this historical context that tries to add nuance and perspective to issues of religion, politics, and culture, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. I try to do deep dives on topics every Monday. I connect the past to the present on Wednesdays, and on Fridays I pull back the curtain on the historian's craft, talking with authors, dissecting new books, and looking at sources behind historiographical arguments so that you too can become an expert historian. And if you'd like to give back to this channel to make sure that we can continue our work, you can become a member, where for a nominal fee you can get early access to videos, icons next to your name when you leave comments, and feel good that you are supporting public-facing historical scholarship. I also recommend subscribing to my work on different platforms, following my free or subscribing to my free kit newsletter, following me on TikTok and Instagram where I do supplemental videos. Links to all of these can be found in the video description. And please mark your calendar for a week from now, Wednesday, May 6th at 7 p.m. Mountain Time, where I will be doing my next live video talking with Lindsay Hansen Park about Mormon fundamentalism, polygamy, and especially media depictions. These are important discussions to have, which is why I'm glad that there's interest at the moment, and I hope we can add nuance to all these broader debates. Shirley Draper was born and raised within the FLDS community and lived in Colorado City, Arizona. She left when she was 33 years old, taking her 4 children with her. She then received her MA in public administration and now serves as the director of operations at Cherish Families, an organization that provides compassionate support to individuals and families, primarily those with polygamous background. And in this interview, you'll see how that background, both in her personal life and now her professional life, gives her a bit of a unique and necessary perspective when viewing the media frameworks of fundamentalism like those we see in Trust Me. So without further ado, let's jump into that interview. All right, I am now very pleased to be joined by Shirley Draper, the director of operations at Cherish Families and a longtime member of the Short Creek community. Shirley, why don't we start out at a basic level? What were your overall impressions on the Trust Me documentary series?
Well, I mean, there was a lot of tension in that for me. And the number one being the exploitation of the victims and the families. I just felt like, I'm very, very grateful that the filming was done and was able to take down Sam Bateman. The fact that it got turned into a documentary for the profit of the producers, which the Caddises were listed as producers, so they got paid, was really quite problematic to me.
Yeah, I think as I talked about my video last week, that it's often important to keep two things separate that are easily conjoined. The methods that were used to capture all that footage and eventually helped toward taking Samuel Bateman down, and then the entertainment decisions made after Samuel Bateman was in prison to then use that for other ends. It's almost like there was a bait and switch on the one end that had, legal reasons, and then a bait and switch on that to then use it for other purposes. So yeah, and I had Dr. Galliano talking about this last week as well. So this definitely seems to be a strong feeling I'm hearing from many in the community. So given your longtime background in the community, not to mention your own both your personal history, but also your work with cherished families and other things. What are some of the tensions you found within this particular story, even setting aside the exploitation issues, that you think are important to understand the Short Creek world?
Well, I mean, first of all, I want to say that what this documentary did was really kind of deepen and strengthen a trope that I find very problematic. And that is that, this is a community of people who are really quite, how do I say this, naive, and that they need somebody to come in from the outside to rescue them. And so that white savior notion has been a problem for this community for a long time. I will say, there were many, many people who were working on taking down Sam Bateman, who are aware of his crimes, who've been reporting to the authorities, and not just, Christine and Tolga, but these are people who are not going to be coming forward for a myriad of reasons. But the community, what's happening in Short Creek, there's some miraculous, amazing things that are happening at the hands of the people who live there, who've experienced it. And so much reform, so much amazing healing going on. But that's not the sensational story that ever gets told. It's always told about somebody coming in from the outside and doing something heroic and in the process really exploiting the community, its history, its trauma and pain, and then exploiting these very, very young people who are not being compensated because of this completely unethical ethics of not paying documentary subjects, which I've got a whole diatribe about that. And so the people who were exploited and harmed by this documentary will never, ever benefit from it. And the people who do the exploitation are the ones that are laughing all the way to the bank.
Yeah, I think I mentioned this in my video last week, but I was so struck by the opening scene of the documentary is Christine Tolga being staged for a scenic shot that really kind of sets the tone for everything that's going to follow, that we kind of get this hero. We are sacrificing. We gave up a life of prosperity to live among the polygamists. And part of me, the optimist in me kept on hoping that at some point they were going to flip that, and say but then I realized I wasn't the enlightened outsider all the time. I have my own issues. These are universal problems we're all facing. And I don't think we ever got that the opening thought of
some self-reflection.
Yeah. I was hoping for some realization and awakening. And sadly that didn't come. So on that mark of the fact that media, documentaries, and even historians, I think the academia is often indicted in this as well. It's so easy and common to turn the Short Creek story and its inhabitants into these sensationalized stories. And even when they're depicted as sympathetic figures, they're sympathetic figures to demonstrate our toleration. We are willing to have them perform on stage, but they're still remaining as an other. So to try to tear down those boundaries, what do you wish people knew more about this community? What's the history or the context that you think is lacking?
Well, first of all, I mean, there's so much nuance, and I know, nuance is very, very difficult to explain in a medium like film and television. But I think that there's never really any good faith effort put toward explaining the complexity of the background and why people would even end up in this situation. I mean, you have full-grown women, and some grandmothers even in this same documentary who look like monsters when literally have been told their whole life to be obedient to this man who tells them to do this next thing and this next thing and this next thing. And it's a natural progression for them to be led like this. But there's really not the context of how the greater world even played into the fact that these women didn't have any other choices. Like, we weren't welcome in the outside world. Why didn't you just go to authorities? Why didn't you just go to police? And I think that Dr. Galeo did a really great job of explaining that with the raids. But the complexity and the nuances and helping people understand that, even within the FLDS, it's not a monolithic community, that there are so many different expressions, and within Short Creek proper, that the FLDS is such a small minority. And then the Sam Bateman, of course, group was even a tinier than that. But the broader community now has really moved on and is working on healing the traumas and the problems of the past. And so those things never get addressed. Yeah. And that's one of the things that I really love for people to understand.
Yeah, it reminds me of a common problem of that historians see with often progressive groups working with these exclusive exceptionalist communities, that there's a subversive anxiety or desire to keep them in their trauma, because that allows you to be the savior. It allows you to look enlightened by comparison, not acknowledging the type of progress and work. So on the topic that I'm glad you brought up of why some of these people wouldn't go for support, I mean, you've often shared a very powerful story in your own life when you chose at the age of 33 to leave with your 4 children. But correct me on the figures, but like, you made the decision several years before, and it just took a long time to then take the next step of seeking external help. Am I remembering that right?
That's correct. So it was 6 years that I had apostatized and decided that Warren Jeffs was horrifying, but lacking any resources, lacking any support or friends on the outside. I mean, the very real physical reasons of not having a place to live or income or, support for my 4 children, those were huge barriers. But one of the massive barriers was this sense of not belonging and not being welcome, and not having any friendly faces on the outside. That was a massive barrier by itself.
And do you worry that there's going to be a precedent that's perpetuated with this idea of external saviors coming in and doing surreptitious recording? Is that going to increase the problems of these group members within the community not trusting outsiders?
Well, I mean, I think that, this is pretty much exposed. It's difficult for people to get any kind of trust anyway. And I think this is kind of, thrown a grenade in that. But the bigger issue for me is that, Cherish Families does crime victim services. And over the past 10 years, we have had to help prosecute and arrest no fewer than 5 predators who've moved to the community specifically to sexually exploit women because of these same stories. Predators are like, 1,000 miles away. They're like, aha, there's a community where I can go in and create these problems. And they do. They move to the communities because of these same tropes. So it's a real issue for me that. Go ahead.
And I'm so glad you brought that up, because that story, the slow, organized work, is not as exciting or not as titillating as, these people going undercover and capturing the history. So with that in mind, I'd love for you to tell the viewers what's the important work that Cherish Families is doing. And even though this type of work rarely gets as much of attention, it's doing much more sustained and long-term help.
Well, first of all, the crime victim services that Cherish Families does will never get this kind of attention because we have federal confidentiality rules. And so we are enjoined from talking about it at all as far as, direct victims or victimizations. And so, for me, that's actually one of the reasons why we are so effective in the community, is people know that their stories will not be exploited. They will not be put on television. They will not be, made to account for things that happen to them. But aside from crime victim services, we also provide housing, mental health, legal services. We do family peer support, community education, and there's really so many services that we talk about our program as a crisis to thriving program, where families can come in and get any service they need to go from instability to stability and self-determination. And so I think that the work that we do is so incredible, so powerful. We're having incredible outcomes. And it's that quiet, longitudinal work that's paying off. And we're changing future generations. But again, these are not stories that are gonna, make worldwide attention on Netflix.
So for people who want to know more about this history and this community, and maybe their just appetite is whetted by watching a Netflix documentary, what do you recommend to people to read, to watch, to learn more about this community? What, from someone who was within that circle and then now works with people in that circle, what do you think are the best introductory sources?
So it's been difficult to recommend anything out of the community because they're always told with this hegemonic mainstream lens that you can never understand. But there was one series, a podcast series called Unfinished Short Creek, which was really, really well done. I highly recommend that because it does give that long perspective about how things like this can happen. And then there's a new podcast series that's actually done by a couple of gals from our community called Her Audacity. And I really love how they could kind of get in and just tell individual stories. Like they have people on and they're telling these nuanced, amazing stories that I love seeing, folks and gals from our community taking control of their own stories and telling their own stories so that they're not warped and manipulated. The way you said that about people being really invested in keeping us in the past is just, those same producers of this most recent documentary did the Keep Sweet, Pray, and Obey. And when they came to do that, I spent a full day with them, giving them history, giving them context, and specifically asking them not to, first of all, keep the community in the past and not to be bringing in external voices as experts on the community. And they did both of those things. They carefully curated scenes to make it look like Colorado City 20 years ago. And then they brought in all of these people who had vendettas against the community and elevated them as experts. And so, for me, it's like, so you knew, and then you did it anyway, which really betrays who you are. And so they just lose a lot of credibility to me.
Excellent. Well, these are difficult conversations to have, but they're very, very necessary. So thank you so much, Shirley, for adding this perspective and helping us understand this broader context.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank Shirley again for taking some moments to answer my questions and adding a perspective that sadly does not get heard enough. Now, I want to acknowledge again that this is a complicated topic with strong feelings on either side. And like I said last week, like I said in the interview, and what I want to emphasize again now, is I think we need to keep separate two things that often get merged. One are the methods that were used to help take down Samuel Bateman, and the other are the entertainment decisions around how to tell that story in documentary format. Those two things are connected, but they should not be as merged as I often see in public discussions. So even if you don't 100% agree with all of Shirley's critiques of the series in particular and the media in general, I hope you take some time to sit with that tension and think through the ethics involved with dealing with these very human stories. And please go check out Cherish Families, this wonderful organization that is performing really important work. And that even though it lacks the glitz and glamour that typically gets covered in Netflix documentaries, is doing this substantial work that's going to make generational and substantive change. History has never been more relevant than it is today, and this story is a great example of that. I hope you found this discussion useful. If so, hit the like button, share with others, mark your calendars for the live discussion on May 6th so we can dig into this further, and we will be covering this topic a little more in future videos because I think it's important. So I'll talk then.